So what should be considered the greatest operating system of all time? There is a lot of ongoing debate surrounding this question, and you'll get different answers from every person. But arguably the most popular consensus is that it was Windows XP, the version of Windows released by Microsoft in 2001. It was flexible, versatile, and just nostalgic. And then you have another vocal crowd saying it was Windows 7, with its slick design, fast and stable environment, and its popularization of the search bar, a tool most of us take for granted today. And then you have those really bold people who will claim it was Windows 8.1, which further built on to all these things, the last Windows that valued privacy. And these are all valid opinions to have. But what if it goes deeper than that? What about the OS that directly made all their respective great achievements possible? The OS that everyone seems to forget about. Of course, I am talking about Windows 2000. Although primarily marketed as the business version of Windows, it was also a clear indicator that things were changing, and that Microsoft was ready for the future. A new millennium, a new Windows. The OS was quite well received and experienced some success during the first 2 years of its reign, eventually even holding majority market share. And as great and ambitious as this all sounds, the tale of Windows 2000 is a bit tragic, in that another similarly named Windows Millennium Edition was released at around the same time. Having the greatest OS of all time juxtaposed with the worst OS of all time certainly hasn't helped its presence in the spotlight. Although this distinction may not have confused as many people at the time, it certainly does now in retrospect. This has caused Windows 2000's achievements to be overshadowed, which was further accelerated by the release of Windows XP 2 years later. But today, we are going to make this distinction crystal clear by highlighting its development, the incredible features it introduced and influenced, and give Windows 2000 the reputation it deserves. Now, if you go run on your way to the store to buy a fresh copy of Windows 2000, it's probably going to empty your wallet. But good thing you have extra wallets to keep you covered. Today's sponsor, Anyway, Exter is here to take your understanding of wallets to the next level. It holds everything you need while taking up only half the space of conventional wallets. Before Exter, this was how my wallet looked. I was the laughingstock of the ball, the first YouTuber to reach the International Space Station just by sitting down. But now, with Exter, I feel lighter, more organized, more at ease. I am a new me. They even come with a variety of options, including environmentally friendly options such as vegan leather, and some really cool materials such as space-grade aluminum. And I just love these card holders. Just push the button at the bottom, and they shoot up. I did this for like 20 minutes yesterday. But Exter is also really good about security, including built-in RFID blocking technology, which protects you from wireless skimming and data theft. And my personal favorite is its solar-powered tracking device, which allows you to track your wallet's location on your phone. 2 hours in the sun equals 3 months of charge. And starting today, November 10th, the Black Friday sale starts. Until the 26th, you can get a 55% discount if you use my code NationSquid at checkout or by visiting the link shown on the screen. So get started with a slicker, safer experience with Exter wallets. Now, the backstory behind the development of Windows 2000 requires a bit of historical context to fully understand it. The 90s were an interesting time for Microsoft, to say the least. Their popularity had exploded exponentially since the 1980s, with the growing presence and ease of access to home computers, the popularity of the internet, and the monster hit that was Windows 95. It was at this time Microsoft went from being a cult following among computer nerds to a household name. But this had its disadvantages. Microsoft was well aware of their immense power and took things too far. From attempts to restrict those who wanted to use Netscape Navigator over Internet Explorer and its stronghold on the OS market, the public's positive perception of Microsoft was dwindling. And it's also at this time where Apple makes a bit of a comeback. After a full decade of decline and even being on the verge of bankruptcy, Steve Jobs returns to Apple and the very first iMac is released.
This is iMac.
Within just weeks, iMac becomes the #1 selling computer in America. All you had to do was plug it in with one cable, and you were on the internet within 10 minutes. Not to mention, you could pick your own color. And the whole thing just looked like a machine from the future. This was a strong contrast to the complicated, boring beige boxes that required a million cables to get working, a custom that was to be expected with Windows machines. The iMac wasn't just a utilitarian office machine, it was also your friend. Now, Microsoft's antitrust case and Steve Jobs' return to Apple deserve to be their own separate videos. But it is worth noting that Jobs returned because Apple acquired Next Computer, the company he was running at the time. This meant that Apple now had full access and intellectual property of NextStep, Next's beloved operating system, and the foundation of what would soon become Mac OS X. So what does this all have to do with Windows 2000? In short, Microsoft had seen better days, and Apple was on its way back to the top and had a lot in store for the upcoming years.
You'll notice that this scanner build,
Now, Windows market share was by no means suffering at this time, but their most popular versions of Windows were still being built on top of MS-DOS, an operating system from the early 1980s. Yeah, it was clear that things needed an overhaul, especially with the new millennium around the corner. I mean, those only happen like once every 1,000 years. No big deal. Microsoft needed to be forward-thinking as well. And thankfully, this would not be too hard for them. In fact, you could say that Microsoft was preparing for the death of MS-DOS before even the release of Windows 95, with a product known as Windows NT. Now, the development of Windows NT is quite comprehensive and complicated, so I will keep things as simple as I can. It was essentially Microsoft's first time diverting from MS-DOS, as NT did not use it at all. Instead, it was based on its own proprietary kernel, the NT kernel. Now, when I say this, I am by no means diminishing the incredible cultural significance Windows 95 had on the world. But it is important to note that Windows 95, 98, 98 SE, etc. were all kind of, but also not really, just dressed up versions of MS-DOS. Windows NT, on the other hand, was this new, state-of-the-art technology for Microsoft. I mean, this was the cat's pajamas, man. I mean, the bee's knees. In fact, there is some debate on what NT even stands for. Microsoft developer Mark Lakovsky stated that the name derives from the OS's initial target processor, the Intel i860, which had the codename N10. Bill Gates, on the other hand, gave a much simpler answer. It stood for New Technology. Either way, the message was clear, and Windows had an innovative future ahead. So what did NT have to offer in comparison? Well, it was much more stable, had stronger security, supported larger file sizes, had more efficient file management, allowed multiple programs to run at once. That's just the tip of the iceberg. But the first version of NT came out in 1993, so why didn't Microsoft have Windows 95 based on the NT kernel and give everyone the advanced experience? Why have it built on this archaic MS-DOS system? Well, there's a couple things to consider. In 1995, MS-DOS actually wasn't that outdated. Despite being from 1982, it was continuously improved upon and updated, just like any other software, which allowed it to survive well into the 90s. Also, Windows NT was primarily targeted at businesses. And what do businesses have that your average family doesn't? Well, lots of money. NT's hardware requirements were pretty high back then in comparison to MS-DOS and 9X-based Windows versions. Additionally, they took in different types of drivers that often were not compatible with one another. So your favorite video game that ran just fine on Windows 95 may not work at all on Windows NT, as it was much more for work-related activities rather than recreational ones. Not to mention that computers were still getting used to entering households in the first place. Something like MS-DOS or 9X was more than enough for the all-American nuclear family in 1995. But as the years went on and we began approaching Y2K, household computers got more powerful and MS-DOS was starting to show its age. And this was reinforced with everything else that we just talked about. perhaps it was time to finally bring Windows NT into the house. Well, with the popularity of Windows 95, Microsoft was already working on this. In 1996, they released Windows NT 4.0, which included the Windows 95 interface, now allowing people to relive that experience and ease of use at work. Right after its release, Microsoft was already working on its next version, NT 5.0. But as all these technological breakthroughs started happening, it was only a matter of time where everyday computers would get powerful enough where the same version of Windows could be used both at home and at work. You no longer needed this much of a distinction. So what's the best way of making something like Windows NT more hip? Well, by following the same naming structure as their most popular products. Not only that, by celebrating the millennium. And so, Windows NT 5.0 was quickly renamed to Windows 2000. By giving it a new and more appealing name, instead of just adding a new number to the name of a product from 1993, Windows 2000 gathered more eyes from the public. And following the whole NSA key controversy from the previous release of NT, this decision honestly could not have come at a better time, as the NT name was kind of tarnished. Now, this wasn't a big part of it, but still part of it. They didn't need to change anything technologically, just the name. It was brilliant marketing, and to the public's eyes, this was a whole new product. If you don't like what they're saying, change the conversation. And then, just like with any Windows release, Microsoft slowly began throwing together beta versions for testing purposes to make sure any bugs or system issues could be caught and fixed before launch. And then, on December 15, 1999, Windows 2000 was released to manufacturing, and then released to the public on February 17, 2000. And just like that, Windows 2000 was met with great praise. Many people loved how much more refined and secured it was for the business user. But of course, it wasn't immune to criticism either. Many users complained about plug-and-play issues, meaning that certain computer equipment was just not connecting with it properly. But keep in mind, Windows 2000 was still an NT product, even if it didn't explicitly say it was. And NT products had higher hardware requirements. Now, computers were considerably much more powerful in 2000 than they were in 1995, but still, they weren't completely out of the woods yet. It is likely many of these plug-and-play issues arose from just setting up the wrong equipment. And if you had the wrong equipment, the OS just wasn't very transparent about that, and reinstalling everything was often a pain in the neck and much less user-friendly than it was with Windows 98. So yeah, Windows 2000 was by no means perfect, but the reception was still overwhelmingly positive, with computer scientist Abraham Silberschatz even calling it the most reliable, stable operating system Microsoft had ever shipped to that point. So what features made Windows 2000 so special? Well, if I were to list all of them, we would be here all day. That's how much they improved this bad boy. Anyway, I'll just list a few of the most prominent and influential features that the OS had to offer. The first one was Windows File Protection. This was a great tool that prevents critical system files in Windows from being overwritten by programs, whether it was a badly made program or malware, whatever. But since it only protected certain file types, it wasn't perfect. You can thank the love letter worm for pointing that out to us. But still, it arguably saved millions and millions of dollars in circumvented file corruption. Modern versions of Windows now use something called Windows Resource Protection, which does a better job at protecting system files while still allowing for some system customization. But Windows File Protection was a precursor to this. Another feature was the encrypting file system. This is pretty self-explanatory. It allows users to encrypt and decrypt their files whenever they please, providing a whole layer of privacy to the user and better protecting them from potential hackers. Now, this feature is not included in any home versions of Windows. In fact, with Windows XP, Microsoft intentionally kept a lot of features out of the home version because they wanted people to spend more money on the other versions. I know, but still, 2000's introduction of this feature brought a ton more security to succeeding Windows versions. This next feature is a bit smaller, but definitely influential in its own right. 2000 introduced a much cleaner and more hands-on search interface, making it both a lot easier and quicker to locate your files. XP would build directly off this search system, which would facilitate Microsoft into eventually developing Smart Search in Windows Vista and 7. And lastly, probably the most prominent feature Windows 2000 ever introduced, backward compatibility. Although it didn't appear until Service Pack 2, it essentially enabled users to run old versions of Windows programs that otherwise may not be compatible on Windows 2000. It was more of an emulator rather than a native run of the program, so it didn't run everything, but it was significantly better than nothing. But because 2000 was a business OS, this wouldn't really be appreciated until XP came out. XP improved this feature so well, it effectively enabled the merging of the 9X and NT codebases, something Microsoft wanted to do for years, but just didn't have enough time to do with 2000. Now, it wasn't a literal merge, but it allowed a ton of old DOS-based programs to still run on this NT version of Windows. This meant people got to continue using their old programs while also reaping the benefits of the stable and secure NT environments. Best of both worlds, Hannah Montana. So Windows 2000 kind of pioneered all these incredible features that we now take for granted. It was in a sort of limbo. It was advertised and built as a business operating system, yet supported a lot of recreational things, like video games. But as soon as XP came out, 2000 lost all its majority market share to that. But why didn't people just stick with 2000, since it sounds like it was designed pretty similarly to XP? Well, a small part of it was the confusion between 2000 and Millennium Edition. Now, for the hardcore computer geek, this distinction was clear. They were obviously very different things. But to the everyday consumer who knows nothing about computers, aka most people, they were pretty much the same thing. Hell, they even looked identical. In fact, Microsoft had to put on their box built on NT technology to help settle this confusion. And when people bought the home version of Windows, Windows Me, and saw what a complete disaster it was, they felt cheated. So anything affiliated with the year 2000 and Microsoft was ruined in their eyes. Now, this was not a major factor, but it was a factor. Secondly, Windows 2000 just looked boring. It was an Office OS, and it looked like one. Appearance-wise, it was just a rehash of Windows 98, more of the same thing Microsoft had already been putting out. Remember what we said about the iMac? It was fun, friendly, and Windows XP was pure eye candy. A whole new design, a warm and inviting background. If the average consumer had to choose between these two, they are most definitely going to choose the more modern, nicer looking one. And of course, Windows XP just built onto 2000's features and did it better. Quite literally. The earliest beta builds of XP are just slightly modified versions of 2000, and they just kept changing it until they got, well, XP. So Windows 2000 did improve a ton over the previous NT releases when it came to supporting more home-based activities. It even came with DirectX version 7 for video game support, but it just didn't do it as well as XP did. And with XP coming out just 2 years later, it didn't really have a whole lot of time to shine, making many of its achievements kind of overshadowed, and XP just kind of took all the credit. Windows 2000 may not be perfect, and it may not be as well known as the other versions of Windows, but it was the bridge that connected the NT and 9X product lines. Even to this day, many people still swear by it, even preferring the OS over XP or even the modern versions of Windows. While business and home versions of Windows do still exist, they are now both built on the same kernel, making it much less annoying to install similar software. Windows XP may have finalized that step, but Windows 2000 made it possible. So, to Windows 2000, we know you're there, we hear ya, and thankfully you can't hear us. I'm kidding. But you know what would be a great way to show your appreciation to Windows 2000? by supporting me on Patreon or clicking the Join tab next to my name on YouTube and becoming a channel member. Look, emojis. I have Paul in there now. I just need one more member to unlock George. Come on, don't exclude George, damn it. That's why he almost left the Beatles, for crying out loud. Anyway, is Windows 2000 your favorite OS? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. A special thanks to my patrons and channel members for making this video possible. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and click the notification bell so that you never miss a future video.